Hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk HP Lovecraft. If you've not yet subscribed to our channel, please take a moment to do that now. Alright, we are getting down to it, the 7th of 8 stories in this third phase of Let's Talk HP Lovecraft. These are some of the really odds and ends that barely have a connection to HP Lovecraft. However, it's said that he helped with the revisions and some notes and some things like that. So they best fall into the Lovecraft category rather than anywhere else on this channel, so that's why we're talking about The Love Dead with C.M. Eddy Jr., written in 1911, but not published until the July issue of Weird Tales in 1924. It was quite controversial in its time and apparently got banned, and it may have affected Lovecraft's ability to get published. If you're new to the channel, the way that these videos work is that I do a brief synopsis of what happens in the story and then sort of wrap up with some thoughts and feelings about what it all means, or if it's any good. I basically operate under the premise that you've already read the story. Synopsis. It is midnight. The narrator expects to be found by the police who are drawing near to him, and he expects to be locked away for the sick things that he has done. Flashback, we get his story. He was a pale, weird, sickly child who didn't fit in, but when his grandfather dies and he attends the funeral, he gets his first experience with being in close proximity to death, and he finds that it excites him. Sometime later, when his mother dies and his father is grieving, he manages to secure himself an apprenticeship at the local Undertaker, and when he's supposed to be embalming someone, the Undertaker walks in and finds him sleeping, sort of wrapping his arms around, hugging the corpse that he's supposed to be caring for. The Undertaker is an old man, but he thinks that, yeah, you know what, he's just been around death too long, he needs to be away from it. Later, his father dies as well, and he moves on and he goes to a bigger city nearby. In the city, he takes on another undertaking job, but when things are slow, he discovers that, yeah, you know, I can go out and create my own corpses. And so he does that. He begins killing vagrants and people in the streets and the alleys by night, and he does this for quite some time. When he accidentally leaves a clue behind, he feels that maybe they're going to find him, so he goes off to World War I, and that allows him to be in close proximity to a lot of death for several years. After the war, he says he's one of the last ones to come home. Now that the death is done, he begins his old shenanigans, begins killing. Having left another clue behind and having allowed the police to put two and two together, they realize that the same killer is active again, and they start closing in on him. There's a long chase. He eventually goes back to his own town, and there in the cemetery where they'd first buried his grandfather and his father and his mother, he slits his veins open and he waits for death, and he feels the same excitement that he gets from being around other dead people, but he also manages to write his entire account there while he's waiting to die. Remarkably, isn't it? Alright, so I was expecting a lot worse. It's not as graphic as I was expecting, which is a good thing. I don't really need that in my life. But the good, you know, it is frantic pace. It's a lot of urgency, peppered with flowery prose, and somehow the whole thing feels excitement, and it seems to work despite its flaws. You know, my research for the video seemed to indicate that we're going to see some necrophilia. Didn't really get that other than him sort of hugging the body. They didn't dare to go that far. So I take it as meaning that this person is excited by the presence of death, but he's not necessarily sleeping with the corpses, which of course is even more disgusting than what he is doing. But some people are, in fact, excited by death and by the fear of death, I guess. So it's more of an actual, I would say, a serial killer story. It's essentially his confession, so we get to see into the mind of, you know, what drives him and why he feels the way he feels, which is weird, but it's interesting to be in his mind. So often, you know, serial killer stories are mysteries, and they're from the perspective of the police and the investigators and the victims rather than the killer themselves, so that's fairly unique. It's a 20-minute read. It doesn't overstay its welcome. I think that is a positive here as well. Had it gone on much longer, you would have gotten tired of it, and you would have felt that its flaws more in a more pronounced way. But again, being short like that helps the story's effectiveness quite a bit as well. The bad, it's all exposition. It's all the narrator's thoughts and feelings, laying it all out for you. He doesn't dwell on anything, doesn't really get into the nitty-gritty and the nasty details. That can be a negative in a way, I think. It may have been interesting to have more points of view into the tale. Of course, that would take away from the fact that it was sort of interesting because it was the point of view of the killer. But at the same time, I did wish that I had more points of view of the people who are looking in on it from the outside and who are investigating him or who are victims of him and things like that. It would have been interesting to have that perspective as well. But that's basically it. Not a wonderful story, but also not the worst one in this batch. So there is that. It definitely, I realize it was written a long time ago and published in the 1920s, so back then it may have seemed quite graphic and risque, but I don't think it should have ever caused the amount of controversy that it apparently did at the magazine, and having issues banned in some places, and Lovecraft perhaps affecting his ability to get published in the magazine again. So I think that's all unnecessary because it's not really that bad. Or that graphic and disgusting. It's more of an emotional roller coaster ride through the eyes and the heart and the brain of a serial killer who has a thing for death. But that's it. All right. After this, one more story in this batch before we lay Let's Talk H.P. Lovecraft to rest again for a while. That is Satan's Servants with Robert Bloch. It looks like Lovecraft read the story, given him some notes and some suggestions. It's mostly a Robert Bloch story, but there is that Lovecraft fingerprint, which is why we're talking about it here on Let's Talk H.P. Lovecraft. So thank you for tuning in. Until next time, keep it creepy.